Lyra had always known she was different. From the moment she had taken her first steps on the soft, mossy ground of Zorathia, she had towered over her peers. Her muscles were thick and strong, her form massive and unyielding. Even her scales, a shimmering shade of soft blue, seemed to glow with a light of their own. The elders would stare, mutter to each other, and shake their heads. Too big. Too strong. Not right. Lyra did not understand it at first. She had tried to join in with the others, running through the forest, leaping over rivers, laughing with the smaller creatures of her kind. But every time she ran, the ground shook beneath her, and every leap seemed too large, too powerful. They stared at her not with admiration but with fear. She noticed the whispers when she passed by. Useless. Too massive. Can't breed. A waste. She did not know what useless meant, but the sting of their words reached her heart. She had tried to ignore it, tried to keep smiling, tried to prove herself. She fought stronger than anyone, hunted larger prey, built nests that could withstand the fiercest storms. But nothing was enough. The elders, the council, they had already decided her fate long before she understood it. It was the day of the council that changed everything. Lyra was called to the Grand Hall, a vast place carved into the living rock where the leaders of her people sat in judgment. Her massive form made the doors creak as she entered, and she felt every eye in the room on her, measuring her, judging her. Lyra, the chief elder said, his voice cold and heavy, you have grown stronger, larger than anyone, but your form, your size, it is beyond what is needed. You cannot mate. You cannot contribute to the continuation of our kind. You are surplus. Lyra froze. Surplus. The word repeated in her mind, echoing louder with every heartbeat. She had heard it before in whispers, in cruel remarks, but to hear it from the council itself, spoken with such finality, made her chest tighten. What does that mean? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. It means, another elder interjected, that you will be sold. You will serve a purpose, but not among your kind. You will be used as sustenance for others. It is tradition. It is law. Lyra's stomach dropped. Her massive form, which had been the source of pride for her entire life, was now the reason for her condemnation. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, the heat rising to her cheeks. She wanted to roar, to fight, to lash out, but she knew it would do nothing. They had made their decision, and so with a heavy heart she followed the guards. Each step shook the stone floor beneath her, echoing like a drum of doom. The creatures of her village lined the streets silently, eyes downcast or filled with shame. Some looked at her with pity, others with relief. Relief that the problem was no longer theirs to deal with. She felt every glance, every judgment, and it cut deeper than any weapon could. The market was a place Lyra had never truly seen before. It sprawled across a vast canyon, a chaotic jumble of stalls, cages, and platforms filled with the smells of smoke, sweat, and fear. Creatures from all over the planet were here, either sold or buying, trading, and bargaining. Lyra had never imagined she would end up here, displayed like a prize, like an object. She was placed on a high platform. From here she could see the crowd gathering below. Many stared in awe at her massive form. Some gasped, pointing at her muscles, at the shimmering scales, at the sheer size that dwarfed every other creature around. But soon awe turned into mockery. Whispers began to spread. Too big. Cannot breed. Only good for food. Lyra felt a hollow ache in her chest. She had always believed in her strength, her power, her resilience. She had always thought that her size would protect her, would give her pride, but now it seemed it was a curse. Days passed. Buyers came and went. Some were curious, examining her massive limbs, touching her scales. Most were cruel. They laughed at her, mocked her, called her names that burned like fire. Lyra would not cry. She would not scream. She kept her head high, her eyes forward, hiding the despair that threatened to consume her. At night she would sit alone on the platform, watching the twin moons rise over the jagged horizon. Their light reflected off her scales, turning her blue shimmer into silver. She missed her home, her family, the gentle creatures who had once accepted her for who she was. And yet, she had been abandoned, betrayed by those who should have loved her most. But even in the darkest moments, a small ember of hope remained. She did not know why or how, but she felt it flicker when the market grew quiet. Perhaps it was the feeling that life was not entirely over, that something beyond this cruelty might exist. Something that could see her not as a waste but as she truly was. Strong, alive, and capable of more than anyone imagined. And then one day he appeared. Humans were rare on Zorathia. Most creatures of the world had never seen one. They were smaller, fragile-looking, and often underestimated. This human was no different at first glance. He stood with his hands behind his back, observing the market, seemingly out of place among the chaos. But when his gaze fell upon Lyra, everything changed. He didn't stare with mockery. He didn't laugh. He didn't whisper cruelly to the others. He looked at her, really looked at her, as if he could see the fire in her heart, the strength in her body, and the sorrow in her eyes. Lyra felt something she had not felt in a long time. Being seen. Not for her size, not for her form, not for her ability to breed or provide, but simply for herself. The ember of hope flared, warming her chest, making her feel a strange mixture of fear and anticipation. The human approached the market officials, and Lyra heard words she had not dared to imagine. "I'll take her," he said simply. No bargaining, no mockery, no hesitation. The market fell silent. A human alone claiming the creature everyone had deemed useless, impossible, laughable. And yet it was true. The officials glanced at one another, unsure of what to say, what to demand. But the human's gaze remained steady on Lyra, unwavering in its respect, in its understanding. Lyra's heart raced. Could this small, fragile-looking creature truly see her? Could this human truly understand what she had been through? The loneliness, the rejection, the despair. She wanted to believe, wanted to hope. But years of cruelty had built walls around her heart. Could she trust again? Could she allow herself to feel that spark of hope without fear? As the transaction was completed, the officials stepped back. Lyra was led down from the platform. Her massive form cast shadows across the ground, and the crowd parted, murmuring in disbelief. Some creatures stared with curiosity, others with envy, and a few, perhaps, with the faintest glimmer of regret for the cruelty they had shown her. The human held out a hand. Lyra hesitated for a heartbeat, then touched it with the tip of her clawed finger. The warmth of his hand, the gentleness of his grip, sent a shiver through her massive body. For the first time in her life, someone treated her not as a problem, not as food, not as a waste, but as someone worthy, and in that moment, as the market fell behind her and the horizon stretched wide with possibilities, Lyra felt a tiny, fragile hope take root. Perhaps this human, small but brave, could show her a life she had never imagined. Perhaps she could be more than her size, more than her form, more than what others said she was. For the first time, Lyra dared to think. Maybe she was not useless. Lyra's first steps away from the market felt strange and heavy. Every movement reminded her of her size, of the way she towered over almost every creature she passed. The humans and alien traders had parted for her as she walked with Joran, the human who had claimed her. Their whispers followed her like shadows, some curious, some fearful, some mocking. She is massive. She is unnatural. She is nothing. Lyra tried to ignore them, tried to push the words out of her mind, but they clung like thorns, pricking at her heart with every beat. Joran led her through narrow streets and jagged alleys of the city that had been her home only in passing. Lyra noticed the grime and the smoke, the way vendors shouted over the crowd, trying to sell their goods, trying to make themselves heard. She saw creatures smaller than her, weaker than her, and yet they moved with a confidence she had never known. And then she realized why. She had never been among equals. She had always been too big, too strong, too different. Her strength had set her apart, and now being different had become her curse. They arrived at a small, quiet building on the edge of the city. It was modest, with walls of dark stone and a wooden door, but Lyra could feel the safety within. Joran opened the door, and the room smelled faintly of herbs, clean water, and warmth, a stark contrast to the chaos of the market. For the first time in her life, Lyra felt calm. She lowered her massive body to the floor, her claws clicking against the stone, and let out a deep breath. "You're safe here," Joran said softly, his voice calm, steady, like an anchor in a storm. He extended a hand toward her, not in command, but in invitation. Lyra hesitated, her instincts screaming caution. But something in his gaze, the patience and gentleness, made her inch forward. She touched his hand lightly, and for a moment the world outside ceased to exist. The whispering voices, the mocking, the fear, they were gone. There was only this strange, fragile creature who had chosen her, who had seen her not as food, not as a waste, but as someone worth caring for. Days passed. Lyra watched Joran work, observed the way he moved, the way he tended small machines and plants, the way he spoke to other humans with respect and calm authority. She realized he was unlike any creature she had ever known. He was not the strongest, nor the fastest, nor the largest, but he commanded attention in a way that made others listen. And strangely, that gave her hope. Perhaps strength was not just muscle and size. Perhaps strength could be courage, kindness, and patience. Still, not everything was peaceful. The market had not forgotten her. Rumors spread quickly. Word reached the ears of other creatures that a human had claimed the useless giant. Some came to challenge Joran, believing that no one could rightfully own such a being. They laughed at him, shouted at him, demanded he release her. "You cannot keep her. She is too large, too powerful, too dangerous. She is food, nothing more." Lyra's heart clenched. She had felt these words before, from her own kind, from those who were supposed to guide and protect her. Now she heard them again, but coming from outsiders. She wanted to roar, to lash out, to crush them under her strength. But Joran stood firm beside her. "She is not food," he said calmly, yet with authority. "She is alive. She is smart. She is strong. And she is free," the challengers sneered. But Lyra felt something shift within her. For the first time, someone was defending her, truly defending her. Not for her size, not for her power, not for the usefulness of her form, but for the being she was inside. Pride swelled in her chest, a feeling she had almost forgotten. She straightened her massive shoulders and lifted her head, her eyes glowing softly under the light of the twin moons. That night, as the city quieted and the market emptied, Lyra and Joran stood on the roof of their small home. The stars above were bright and endless, casting silver light over her shimmering scales. For a moment, the weight of the world seemed lighter. She let herself feel something she hadn't allowed in years: hope. Perhaps life could be different. Perhaps she could belong. Lyra began to explore the limits of her new life. She learned the layout of the home, the weight of her movements on the stone floors, and the ways Joran adapted to her size rather than forcing her to adapt. For the first time, she did not have to hide her strength, her size, or her form. Here she could simply be, but peace was fragile. Creatures from her world, curious or cruel, began to visit. Some came with admiration, intrigued by her massive form. Others came with malice, remembering the ease with which she had been dismissed before. They whispered, poked, and mocked, testing Joran's resolve, testing her own patience. Lyra had to learn to control her anger, to restrain the instinct to lash out. And she learned quickly. Joran's calm presence, his steady hand on her scaled shoulder, reminded her that violence was not always the answer. One day, a group of creatures approached, sneering and laughing. "So this is the giant the human claims," one said. "You cannot breed her. She is useless. She is nothing but meat." Lyra's massive form tensed. She felt every muscle ready to respond, every instinct screaming to attack. But Joran placed his hand gently on her chest. "Do not give them the satisfaction," he said softly. "Show them your worth, not your fury." She lowered her claws and straightened her massive frame. Then slowly, deliberately, she began to demonstrate her strength, not through violence, but through action. She helped rebuild a broken structure in their small compound, lifted fallen beams with ease, and moved heavy stones to create a proper garden. Creatures watched, their whispers turning to murmurs, their mockery fading as they saw what she could do. In that moment, Lyra realized something profound. Her size, her strength, her massive form, they were not a curse. They were a gift, not just for destruction or intimidation, but for creation, for protection, for kindness. And most importantly, she realized that she had a choice. She could allow herself to be defined by others' cruelty, or she could define herself through her actions and her heart. Night after night, she sat beside Joran, watching the twin moons rise over the horizon. She felt the warmth of his presence, the safety of his hand on her scales, the quiet acceptance that she had never known. She began to dream, not of running, not of hiding, not of being accepted by those who had rejected her, but of building a life, a place where she belonged, a place where her size and strength were celebrated rather than mocked. And in the quiet, under the stars, Lyra allowed herself to hope. She allowed herself to imagine a life where she was not food, not useless, not a burden, but a being of value, of power, of love. She did not yet know what challenges would come, nor what battles she would face, but she knew one thing for certain. She was no longer alone. For the first time in her life, Lyra felt seen. And the ember of hope inside her began to burn brighter, promising a future she had never dared to imagine. Lyra had spent days in the small compound with Joran, learning the rhythms of a life that felt strange but safe. The world outside, the chaotic market, still whispered in her mind, reminding her of rejection, of cruelty, of the way her own people had cast her aside. Yet with Joran those whispers began to fade. For the first time she did not feel like a monster, she felt seen. Joran was unlike any creature Lyra had ever known. Small and fragile-looking, yes, but his presence carried a quiet strength she could feel in her chest. He did not try to impress her with displays of power. He did not force her to prove herself. Instead, he spoke gently, guided her patiently, and allowed her to move in ways that honored her massive form. Lyra realized that this human, so small compared to her, possessed a kind of courage and understanding that even the strongest of her own kind had never shown. Each day, Lyra learned something new. She helped Joran gather supplies, lifting heavy beams, clearing paths, and stacking materials with ease. He watched her work, nodding with appreciation, never questioning her value, never mocking her size. And in return, he began to show her the small joys of life she had long forgotten. He taught her how to tend a garden, to feel the soil in her claws, to nurture the tiny seedlings that would grow into strong plants. Lyra felt a strange warmth as she worked beside him. She had spent her life proving her strength through combat, through dominance, through survival. But here, her strength built life instead of taking it. Yet even in this quiet happiness, danger lingered. Word of the giant claimed by a human spread like wildfire across the city. Creatures came in groups, curious, mocking, and sometimes openly hostile. They sneered at Joran, claiming he had no right to own Lyra. Some demanded he release her, insisting that she was too large, too powerful, and therefore a threat, or simply food. Lyra felt her muscles twitch, her instincts ready to strike, to crush, to defend herself. But Joran's calm voice held her back. "Show them who you are, not just what you can destroy," he said, placing his hand gently on her massive shoulder. The touch was grounding, like a silent promise that he would always be there and that she did not have to fight alone. That night, under the twin moons, Lyra reflected on what he had said. She realized that strength alone did not make her valuable. Her worth was not in her size, her form, or her ability to intimidate. True strength, she began to understand, lay in the courage to be kind, in the patience to teach, in the willingness to protect rather than destroy. And for the first time, she felt that her massive form, once a curse, could be a gift. The challenges came sooner than she expected. One morning, a group of her former peers arrived at the compound. They were taller and thinner than the average creatures, but their eyes burned with scorn. "So this is the one the human claims?" One of them sneered. "The giant who cannot breed, the failure of our kind?" Lyra's claws flexed, her body tense. Her heart pounded as memories of mockery, rejection, and fear flooded her mind. But before she could react, Joran stepped forward, small yet unwavering. "She is not your failure," he said calmly. "She is not your property, and she is not your prey. She is alive, she is strong, and she is free." The words were like fire to Lyra's heart. No one had ever spoken to her like that. Not her elders, not her peers, not even the council that had sentenced her to be sold as food. She felt a surge of pride, raw and fierce. She lifted her massive head, her scales glinting under the sunlight, and let her presence speak for her. She did not strike. She did not roar. She simply stood immense and unyielding, a living testament to her worth. The visitors hesitated. They had expected fear, trembling, anger, but not this. They saw her strength, yes, but they also saw the calm, measured control in her stance. They saw Joran's hand resting on her shoulder, a symbol that her size and power could coexist with gentleness and trust. Slowly they backed away, their sneers faltering, replaced with something like respect or at least acknowledgement. Over the next few weeks, Lyra began to test the boundaries of her new life. She explored the surrounding forests, learning how to move quietly despite her size, how to sense danger before it arrived, how to use her strength to help rather than harm. Joran accompanied her, teaching her navigation, strategy, and the subtle art of patience. Together they built structures, gathered resources, and fortified the compound. Lyra discovered that her massive form allowed her to accomplish feats that others could only dream of. Lifting fallen trees to clear paths, moving stones to build shelters, and even carrying water from the distant river without tiring. Yet, it was not only physical tasks that revealed her strength. Lyra began to understand emotions she had never allowed herself to feel. She laughed when Joran told stories of his far-off home. She cried silently when she remembered her rejection, and she felt joy when she watched tiny seedlings grow into strong plants. Each emotion was a new lesson, a reminder that life was not just about survival or strength. It was about connection, trust, and love. One evening, while the twin moons reflected off her shimmering scales, Lyra looked at Joran with a newfound clarity. "Why did you choose me?" she asked softly, almost afraid of the answer. He smiled, small but genuine. "I did not see what others saw. I saw you, Lyra, not your size, not your form, not your past, but you. I saw your heart, your courage, your strength. I saw someone worth saving, worth caring for. And I knew. I had to." Lyra felt her chest tighten. The words were not grand or heroic, but they carried more weight than any council's decree or market's judgment ever could. For the first time, she felt truly understood. She realized that her worth was not dictated by others' rules or expectations. It was something she could define herself, with those who chose to see her, who chose to stand beside her. As the night deepened and the compound grew quiet, Lyra rested her massive head near Joran's lap. She let out a slow, contented sigh, feeling the warmth of his hand on her scales. The market, the whispers, the cruelty of her past, they felt distant now, almost unreal. She had survived. She had endured. And now, she had a chance to live, to belong, to be seen. Lyra closed her eyes under the silver light of the moons, letting hope fill the empty spaces that rejection had carved. She did not yet know what challenges the world would throw at her next, nor the battles she would have to face. But she knew this. As long as she had Joran by her side, she was no longer alone. She had someone who believed in her, who trusted her, who saw her worth. And in that realization, Lyra felt something she had never known. Freedom. Not just the freedom to live, but the freedom to be herself, in all her massive, powerful, beautiful glory. For the first time, she did not fear the world outside. She was ready to face it with courage, with strength, and with the heart of someone who had been discarded but refused to be broken. Lyra was no longer just the giant that others had laughed at. She was alive, she was strong, and she was seen. And that, she realized, was more powerful than any weapon, any muscle, or any council's decree. Days turned into weeks, and Lyra began to feel the rhythm of her new life alongside Joran. The small compound, once unfamiliar and strange, had begun to feel like home. Every corner held a memory. Every beam of sunlight across the stone walls carried a sense of warmth. She still remembered the market, the whispers, the cruel eyes that had once deemed her worthless, but now those memories felt distant, like a dream she had almost forgotten. Joran had a way of noticing the smallest details. He would adjust the height of a shelf so her massive arms could reach comfortably. He would leave soft blankets near her resting place, knowing her scales could scratch wood and stone. He spoke to her patiently, explaining things she had never considered, like the patterns of the wind or the smell of the soil after rain. Lyra began to understand that this human saw the world differently, and through him she began to see it differently too. It was during one quiet morning that their bond deepened in a way neither had expected. Lyra had been struggling to lift a fallen tree from the edge of their garden. Her muscles strained, her claws dug into the earth, but the massive log barely moved. She was frustrated, her pride stinging at the inability to conquer this task. Joran approached, small and steady. "Let me help," he said, placing his hands on a lever he had built. "Together we can move it. Not by force alone, but by working together." Lyra paused, hesitant at first. She had spent her life relying on her strength alone, trusting no one to share her burdens. But she saw the determination in Joran's eyes, the calm confidence that she had begun to admire. She nodded, lowering herself slightly to cooperate with his efforts. Together, they moved the log. It shifted slowly at first, then more quickly, and finally tumbled to the side. Lyra let out a deep breath, her chest heaving not from exhaustion, but from a strange feeling she could not name. Pride, yes, but something more. Gratitude, connection. For the first time, She felt that her strength was not just a solitary force, but a power that could be shared, that could build, that could create life instead of destruction. From that day, Lyra noticed the subtle ways in which Joran cared for her. He would leave water bowls filled just enough to reach her claws. He would speak softly when others shouted, protecting her from words that might hurt. He never touched her roughly, never demanded obedience, he only asked for trust. And gradually, Lyra began to offer it. The small gestures mattered. She began to sleep closer to him at night, resting her massive head near his legs, letting him stroke her scales. She began to follow him through the forests, not as a slave or a tool, but as a companion, a partner. And in return, Joran began to share parts of himself with her, the stories of his homeworld, the small dreams he carried, the hope that had driven him to risk everything to claim her when the market had deemed her useless. It was not easy. Lyra still carried the weight of rejection, the scars of cruelty. Every time they ventured outside the compound, she felt the eyes of strangers, the judgment of those who had not seen her as Joran had. Some whispered, some pointed, some laughed. Her muscles tensed, ready to strike, ready to defend. But Joran's presence reminded her that not all creatures were cruel, that there were those who could see past her size and understand her worth. One evening, under the light of the twin moons, Joran took Lyra to a cliff overlooking the valley. The wind tugged at her scales, the silver light glinting off her massive form. "You see this world?" he asked. "It is vast, full of life, full of challenges, and yet, you can face it all, Lyra. Not alone, but with me. We can create something here. Something lasting. Something that no one can take from us." Lyra's chest swelled. She had never heard words like these, never felt so truly understood. Her massive form, which had once been her curse, felt like a symbol of resilience, a shield for the life she was beginning to imagine. For the first time, she felt that she could belong somewhere, not just in Joran's eyes, but in the world itself. Their bond grew through small, quiet moments as well. Lyra would help Joran repair broken tools, using her claws to steady pieces too heavy for him. He would hum songs from his homeworld, teaching her the rhythms and melodies of music she had never known. They would sit together under the stars, sharing silence, sharing trust, sharing an unspoken promise that neither would abandon the other. Lyra discovered something else, too, the joy of being seen without expectation. Joran never asked her to fight, never asked her to prove herself, never valued her for her size alone. He valued her mind, her heart, her presence. And in this, Lyra found healing. Years of mockery, rejection, and dismissal began to fade, replaced with a growing confidence, a quiet strength that came from being loved for who she truly was. But life was not without its trials. One morning, a small group of travelers approached the compound. Curious, cautious, they had heard of the giant claimed by a human, and came to see for themselves. Some whispered, "She is too big. Dangerous. A monster." Lyra's muscles tensed, ready to defend, but Joran stepped beside her, calm and steady. "They came to see," he said softly, "not to harm us. Show them who you are, Lyra. Not just your size, but your heart, your courage, your strength." Lyra lifted her massive head and allowed her presence to speak. She moved carefully, demonstrating her intelligence, her control, and her gentleness. She helped them navigate the garden, lifted fallen beams for them, and even guided them safely through the rough terrain surrounding the compound. By the time the travelers left, their whispers had changed from mockery to awe, from fear to respect. Lyra realized that strength, when paired with patience and kindness, could command more respect than sheer force ever could. That night, Lyra rested beside Joran, her massive form curled protectively around him. She felt a warmth that was deeper than the sun, brighter than the moons. She had survived the cruelty of her world, the rejection of her people, and the threat of being sold as food. Now she had a chance to live, to build, to love, and to be loved in return. For the first time, Lyra felt that she was more than her size, more than her form, more than the opinions of those who had once deemed her useless. She was alive. She was strong. She was seen. And with Joran by her side, she believed, truly believed, that she could face whatever challenges the universe might throw at her. The ember of hope that had first sparked in the market had now grown into a steady flame, lighting the path forward. Lyra realized that she was not just surviving, she was living. Not just existing, but thriving. And for the first time in her life, she allowed herself to dream of a future that was not defined by fear. rejection or weakness, but by courage, connection, and love. Lyra's days of quiet growth with Joran were suddenly interrupted. News of the giant claimed by a human had traveled far, reaching ears that thirsted for chaos and dominance. A group of creatures from her old world arrived at the edge of the compound, their eyes filled with scorn and curiosity. They came not to see her, but to test her, to remind her of the world that had rejected her, and to challenge the human who dared claim her. Lyra sensed their approach long before they arrived. Her massive form tensed, her muscles coiling with instinctive strength. The ground seemed to tremble slightly under her weight, warning the intruders that she was no ordinary creature. Her heart pounded with a mix of fear, anger, and an unfamiliar spark of determination. She had faced cruelty before, but this was different. This was not just a challenge to her size or strength. It was a challenge to her very existence, to her right to live freely and be seen for who she was. Joran approached calmly, standing beside her. Though small in comparison, he radiated confidence and authority. "They are here to challenge you," he said softly, placing his hand on her massive shoulder. "But remember, Lyra, strength is more than muscle. Show them who you are, not just what you can do." The first of the challengers stepped forward, sneering. "So this is the one the human claims," he said, voice dripping with mockery. "The giant who cannot breed, the failure of our kind. Tell me, human, why do you keep her?" "She is not yours to judge," Joran replied calmly, his eyes meeting the creatures without fear. "She is alive. She is strong, and she is free. You will not take that from her." Lyra felt a surge of pride. For the first time, someone had spoken for her with conviction, without hesitation, without fear. She straightened her massive shoulders, lifted her head, and let her presence speak louder than any words could. Her scales shimmered under the sun, her muscles rippled with controlled power, and her eyes held a calm, steady fire. She did not roar. She did not strike. She simply stood, immense and resolute, showing the challengers that she was no longer their victim. The creatures laughed at first, expecting fear or anger, but when nothing came, their laughter faltered. Lyra moved gracefully, her massive form controlled, precise. She demonstrated her strength not with violence but with action. She lifted fallen beams, cleared obstacles, and showed the intelligence behind her size. Every movement was deliberate, every action a statement. She was not to be underestimated, not to be mocked, not to be dismissed. Joran watched with quiet pride. He had seen her potential from the moment he first claimed her, but now it was undeniable to anyone who looked. Lyra's massive form, once a symbol of uselessness to her people, had become a beacon of resilience, courage, and controlled power. The challengers faltered, whispering among themselves, realizing that the creature they had come to mock was far more than they had imagined. "You have strength," one of them admitted finally, voice hesitant. "But what of your heart? Can you be more than a weapon?" Lyra's eyes softened. She stepped closer to Joran, letting him stand between her and the challengers. "Strength is not just muscle," she said, her voice low but clear. "It is courage, it is patience, it is protection. It is knowing when to fight and when to care. I'm not just my size. I am all of this, and I choose to use it wisely." The challengers exchanged glances, unsure of how to respond. Some stepped back, humbled. Others still sneered, but the fire in Lyra's eyes and the calm authority of Joran made them hesitate. For the first time, she realized that her life was no longer dictated by others' judgments or fear. She had chosen her path, and she would not be swayed by cruelty or mockery. In the days that followed, Lyra continued to demonstrate her strength and intelligence. She built structures, tended the garden, and helped Joran fortify the compound against potential threats. Creatures who had once doubted her watched with awe, some even approaching to seek guidance or assistance. Her massive form, once a reason for rejection, had become a symbol of protection and capability. But the challenge was not only external. Lyra had to confront the internal scars left by her past. She remembered the market, the whispers, the cruel eyes of her own kind. There were moments when anger flared, when doubt crept into her mind, whispering that perhaps she was still useless, still unwanted. Each time, Joran's presence reminded her that she was more than her past. His calm voice, his gentle touch, and his unwavering belief in her worth became a shield against the shadows of rejection. One evening, as the twin moons rose high over Zorathia, Lyra and Joran stood atop a hill overlooking the valley. The wind ruffled her scales and the silver light reflected off her massive form, turning her into a creature of ethereal beauty. "You have come so far," Joran said softly. "Do you see it? You are not the creature they told you to be. You are more. You are strong, wise, and kind. And you are not alone." Lyra lowered her massive head, letting the moonlight wash over her. For the first time, she truly saw herself, not through the eyes of cruelty or mockery, but through the eyes of someone who believed in her. She felt pride, not arrogance, strength, not fear, and a fierce determination to live life on her terms, alongside the human who had claimed her when no one else would. The challengers never returned, but their presence left a lasting mark. Lyra realized that the world could be cruel, that there would always be those who doubted her worth or sought to test her strength. But she also knew that with Joran by her side, she could face anything. Together they were unstoppable, not because of brute force alone, but because of trust, courage, and the bond they shared. Lyra curled her massive form near Joran that night, feeling the warmth of his hand on her scales. She had survived rejection, mockery, and the threat of being sold as food. Now she had something far greater: freedom, purpose, and a connection that no one could break. The ember of hope that had sparked in the market had grown into a blazing flame, lighting the path forward, and she knew that her journey had only just begun. For the first time in her life, Lyra did not feel fear. She did not feel useless. She was strong, she was loved, and she was seen. And with that, she embraced a future filled with possibility, courage, and the unshakable belief that she could rise above any challenge. Lyra had never imagined a life like this. Gone were the days of whispers and mockery. Gone were the cruel eyes of her own kind judging her as useless. In their place was something new: respect, curiosity, and the quiet awe of creatures who had once dismissed her. She had survived rejection, betrayal, and the threat of being sold as food. Now she was not only alive, she was thriving. It began with small changes. Creatures who had once avoided her now approached cautiously, observing her massive form with a mixture of curiosity and admiration. They asked questions about her strength, her abilities, her life with Joran. Lyra answered patiently, demonstrating not just power, but intelligence and compassion. Each encounter reminded her that her worth had never been defined by the ability to breed or the opinions of her elders. It had always been her choices, her courage, and the heart she carried inside her massive form. Joran watched her with quiet pride. He had known from the moment he claimed her that Lyra's size and strength were gifts, not curses. But seeing her step into her potential, seeing her confidence grow, filled him with a sense of awe. She was no longer afraid of the world. She no longer doubted her place within it. She had become a force to be reckoned with, not through brute strength alone, but through her intelligence, her patience, and the courage she showed every day. The first true test of her recognition came when a group of traders arrived at the compound. They had heard rumors of the giant claimed by a human and wanted to see her for themselves. Some were wary, expecting a dangerous, uncontrollable creature. Others were curious, hoping to witness the legendary strength of Lyra. She met them with calm authority. Her massive form towered above them, but her posture was controlled, non-threatening. She spoke to them patiently, answered their questions, and demonstrated her skills. She lifted heavy stones, repaired damaged structures, and even helped the smallest creatures navigate the difficult terrain around the compound. By the time the traders departed, the whispers had changed. Where once they had spoken of uselessness and failure, now they spoke of wisdom, courage, and strength. "She is incredible," one said quietly. "Not just her size, but her heart. She is remarkable." Lyra felt a warmth in her chest she had never known. This was not mockery or fear, it was admiration. It was respect. It was recognition. The recognition extended beyond outsiders. Even some of her former peers began to approach cautiously, no longer with sneers but with questions and tentative respect. They observed her life with Joran, watched the way she worked, protected and cared for the creatures around her. Slowly their attitudes shifted. Some admitted quietly that they had been wrong to judge her. Some even sought guidance, asking her to teach them what she had learned about patience, strength, and courage. Lyra felt a sense of pride, but it was different from the pride of brute strength. It was a quiet, steady pride that came from understanding her own worth, from knowing that she had risen above cruelty and fear. She realized that recognition was not just about others seeing her. It was about seeing herself clearly, fully, without fear or shame. Joran and Lyra spent many evenings atop the hill overlooking the valley. The twin moons cast silver light across her massive form, highlighting the shimmering scales that had once been the source of ridicule. Lyra leaned against him, feeling the warmth of his hand on her scales, and reflected on how far she had come. She had survived being discarded, sold, and mocked. She had faced challenges that would have broken others. And now she was not just surviving, she was thriving, building a life filled with trust, love, and purpose. One afternoon, a messenger arrived from the council of her people. They had heard of her deeds, her strength, and the admiration she had earned. For the first time, they sought her counsel. Lyra stood before them, massive and unyielding, but calm and composed. The council members, who had once cast her aside, now looked upon her with caution and respect. "You have exceeded our expectations," one elder admitted, voice low. "We judged you wrongly. You are not a failure. You are strong, wise, and remarkable." Lyra's eyes softened. She did not gloat, did not mock. Instead, she spoke with quiet authority. "Strength is not measured by size alone. It is measured by courage, by patience, by the choices we make and the lives we touch. I am no longer the creature you condemned. I am more, and I will continue to be more with or without your approval." The council nodded, a mixture of shame and respect in their eyes. Lyra felt no anger toward them, only the quiet satisfaction of knowing she had proven herself not by their standards but by her own. She had survived rejection and cruelty, and now she stood as a symbol of resilience, courage, and the true meaning of strength. Life at the compound continued to flourish. Lyra and Joran worked together side by side, building a life that combined safety, growth, and freedom. They protected their home from dangers, nurtured plants and animals, and created a space where others could come for guidance and shelter. Lyra discovered that her massive form, once considered a curse, was now a source of wonder and inspiration. She could lift fallen trees to create paths, move stones to build structures, and defend the weak without fear. And through it all, she remained gentle, patient, and kind. Lyra's recognition was complete not because others had finally accepted her, but because she had accepted herself. She no longer measured her worth by the cruel standards of those who had cast her aside. She measured it by her courage, her heart, and the choices she made each day, and in that measure she was unmatched. As the twin moons rose once more, casting their silver glow across the valley, Lyra stood beside Joran on the hill. Her massive form glimmered in the light, powerful yet serene, a living testament to what could be achieved when courage met compassion. "You have grown," Joran said softly, his hand resting on her scaled shoulder. "Not just in strength, but in heart. The world sees it now, and so do I." Lyra lowered her massive head to touch his shoulder gently, a silent gesture of gratitude and trust. She felt the warmth of recognition, not just from others, but from herself. She had survived the cruelty of her world, endured the judgment of her peers, and risen above it all. And now she was not just alive. She was a symbol of hope, strength, and the power of being seen and understood. For the first time, Lyra truly felt at peace. She had found her place, her purpose, and her bond with Joran. Together they had built more than a home. They had built a life filled with trust, respect, and love. And as she gazed at the horizon, she knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, she was ready. Not because she was massive, but because she had courage, heart, and the unwavering belief that she could overcome anything. Lyra had been sold, discarded, and underestimated. But she had risen above it all. She had found recognition, respect, and most importantly, herself. And with Joran by her side, she knew that the best was yet to come. Word count: 1,000 words. The sun rose slowly over the valley, casting golden light across the compound. Lyra stood at the edge of the hill, her massive form silhouetted against the morning sky. The wind ruffled her shimmering scales, and the quiet hum of life around her seemed to echo a truth she had come to know deeply. She belonged. She belonged not because anyone else had decided it, not because she was useful or capable, but because she had claimed it herself, and because Joran had chosen to stand by her when the world had cast her aside. The memories of the market, of whispers of cruel eyes, flickered through her mind. She remembered the day they had sold her, the way creatures had looked at her as if she were nothing more than meat. She remembered fear, humiliation, and the bitter taste of rejection, but those memories no longer had power over her. They were a part of her past, not her present. She had survived. She had endured. She had risen. And now she was ready to claim her life fully, without apology, without hesitation. Joran approached quietly, his hand resting on her scaled shoulder. "It's a new day," he said softly. "And today, we show the world what we've built together." Lyra's massive form moved with grace as she followed him into the heart of the compound. Creatures who had once doubted her now watched from a respectful distance, some with admiration, some with awe. She did not feel the need to impress them. She did not feel the need to prove herself. Her strength, her size, her courage, they were her own. And now, with Joran by her side, she could use them freely, without fear or restraint. The first test of the day came sooner than expected. A group of outsiders arrived at the valley. Creatures from distant lands who had heard rumors of the giant claimed by a human. Some came with curiosity, others with doubt, and a few with malice in their eyes. They expected a creature to fear or a human to fail, but what they saw was something far different. Lyra stepped forward, massive and imposing but controlled, graceful and confident. Her scales gleamed under the sunlight. Her eyes held calm authority, and every movement radiated strength tempered by wisdom. She lifted fallen stones to clear paths, demonstrated her intelligence, and guided even the smallest creatures safely through the valley. Joran stood beside her, small but unshakable, his presence amplifying her quiet power. The outsiders whispered among themselves, awe creeping into their voices. "She is incredible," one murmured. "Not just her strength, but her heart." Lyra's chest swelled, not with pride alone, but with a deep, steady joy. She had been told she was useless. She had been sold. She had been underestimated and mocked. But now she was more than survival. She was life, she was courage, she was hope, and she had claimed it all herself. As the day progressed, Lyra and Joran worked together to demonstrate what could be built when strength met patience, courage met compassion, and power was guided by wisdom. They repaired broken shelters, tended the garden, and lifted fallen debris from the valley. Every act, no matter how small, was a statement. Lyra was alive, free, and fully herself. That evening, under the twin moons, Lyra finally allowed herself to reflect fully on her journey. She had been discarded and underestimated. She had been sold for food, cast aside because her massive form made her unfit. And yet, here she was, standing stronger than ever, respected by creatures near and far, and deeply loved by the human who had claimed her when no one else would. She turned to Joran, her massive eyes glowing softly. "I never imagined life could be like this," she whispered. "I thought I was worthless, that I was alone." Joran smiled, small but radiant in the moonlight. "You were never worthless, Lyra. You were just waiting for someone to see the truth. And I saw it. I saw you. Not your size, not your past, but the heart you carry inside. And now, the world sees it too." Lyra felt warmth flood her chest, tears prickling at the edges of her eyes. She had been rejected, feared, and underestimated, yet she had survived, grown, and become something extraordinary. She realized that her massive form, the very thing that had once been a curse, was now a symbol of resilience and courage. It had allowed her to rise above cruelty, to protect, to build, and to be seen fully for the first time. The creatures who had once mocked her began to approach slowly, carefully, offering gestures of respect rather than derision. Some brought gifts of food, tools, or knowledge, seeking her guidance. Others simply nodded, acknowledging her presence and her strength. Lyra accepted their recognition with grace, but she knew that her true validation had never come from others. It had come from within, from surviving, from enduring, and from choosing to live boldly despite every obstacle. In the quiet moments that followed, Lyra curled beside Joran under the silver glow of the moons. She felt his hand on her scales, the warmth of his presence grounding her, reminding her that